Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is The Broken Meeple, a show where I rave and rant about board games, but usually more the latter. This is a game that has certainly been high on my please Luke, can you review this as quickly as possible pile, because as much as I wasn't necessarily aware of this one much before Essen, I kind of saw the cover and thought, this could be quite cool. Everybody wanted me to try this one out. Well, it was harder than it seemed to get a copy of this at Essen because they only did pre-orders. That was it. You could only do pre-orders for this, otherwise you didn't get the game. I had to go back to the publisher about 5 or 6 times, constantly sort of checking, right, if you released all the pre-orders, are you now selling to the public yet? And at the very last minute on Sunday, when they just started issuing them to the public, I was able to grab a copy so I could actually review this. So why was I desperate to review it? Well, the name on the box, Tomáš Holek. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, but the idea is that this designer has done something very ballsy this Essen, come out with 3 games at Essen. Different publishers, different levels of complexity, supposedly, and different themes and all sorts. That's quite a dangerous move for a designer to do, but hey, I'm certainly down to see some new faces and, some new kids on the block and see what's what. And you've already seen my review of SETI, where I was gushing a lot about that one, essentially the equivalent of a high 9, low 10 score for me. Well, okay, this is number 2 of 3, so can we continue along the same trend of gushingness, or is this one not quite up to that standard? Tea Garden is essentially a hybrid of deck building and hand management as well as resource management. You are building your tea garden starting from one province across the map in order to produce better quality leaves, and these leaves will start off fresh, which are green, but you can ferment them to be brown. And the idea is that in the maintenance phase, green leaves decrease in quality, brown leaves increase in quality. But the turn sequence is essentially taking a main action, a secondary action, and any number of free actions, in any order you like. And the crux of how you do this mechanic is done with these cards. So here's a selection of starter cards for a typical player. And essentially these cards are comprised of several elements. They will have a strength value on the top, a little red number. They may have a picture of a teapot on them. They may have a picture of a secondary action icon on them. And they may have other benefits like fermented leaves and points and stuff like that for the more powerful cards. But essentially players will start off with 4, and when you want to do an action via your player board, you will play as many cards as you like from your hand, face up underneath each slot, effectively, starting with the first slot, second slot, third slot, and fourth slot as you take turns. And the total of the strength values determines the strength of the action. But the card that is face up on top dictates any other bonuses you might get, what secondary action you may or may not be doing, or what teapots are available for a particular action. So what sort of things can you do? Well, you can build the tea gardens. You just build them across the map. More of them produce more leaves. In certain provinces will produce better quality ones. Your board effectively tracks all the quality leaves on there. You can also sell to caravans, which are essentially a card that turns up throughout the game. There's 3 in each round, and you can sell any quality leaves to these, and they will give you various points and rewards. They're kind of like a, if I've got loads of lesser quality leaves, I can just dump them on the caravans and they'll be happy. And then afterwards, you can decide whether you want to buy some really cool new cards. So these cards come in different tiers, they progress throughout the game, and basically these are here to bolster up your deck. Your deck has basically got little rubbish starter cards, these ones that you can buy, which require certain quality tea leaves. Will give you more actions, more bonuses, more teapots, but crucially they will be higher strength values. The teapots on these cards are essentially a requirement to buy these. You need to have teapots showing amongst all your face-up cards so that when you buy a new card, you match the teapots. And that's the main 3 main actions you'll do. You can ferment leaves and do extra harvest as well, but those are the 3 main ones you'll do. And they're all explained briefly on the little reference guide. Flip it over, you get the secondary actions and the free actions. Free actions are just simple things like leveling up tracks and using various scroll tiles, but the secondary actions stem from one of 3 main things. You have the river track, which goes along the center of the board. Follow it down, get bonuses, get points at the end. You have the university track, which is like a little rondelle thing here. You basically move to the different quadrants, pick a bonus, and as you move around and around and around, you score more points. But the one that's a little different is the cup connections, where you've got these different cup tiles. If you've ever played Pulsar 2849, there's a similar mechanic with the transmitters in there. You are essentially collecting these tiles from the different provinces and putting them together to make color connections. If you do, score more points at the end. But either way, even if if you can't make a colour connection, you will still put a little bonus token in between the two cups, and basically you can take these off as a free action to trigger the effect on the cup. So that's kind of the crux of what you're doing. Each player gets 4 turns max in a round. You do 3 of them for free, it costs to do the 4th one. Once everybody passes, you then do the maintenance phase of collecting tea leaves from your gardens and decreasing and increasing quality as I mentioned, and then you proceed to the next round. After 5 rounds, you ignore the last maintenance phase, total up the victory points from endgame scoring cards such as the Emperor cards, which are these like scoring cards that you can get during the game, which are pretty powerful, as well as where you've ended up on the river and university track and such, and of course the one with the most. Of course! Tea Garden's aesthetics are pretty nice here. I mean, it's lots of little pastel colours everywhere. It certainly looks nice on the table. It's not a particularly big board, so you can actually fit this on a reasonably small table space, although you do need space underneath your board for the cards that you're playing, but for the most part it tends to keep to a reasonable sized table, and of course you need cards laid out below the board for the ones that you can buy, so you know it's not a huge table hog, but it still has some presence. The rules themselves are a little text heavy, I found. You know, the book could have used maybe a few more pictorial examples here and there, but for the most part it's decent, and you know, I actually didn't find that there was a lot of ambiguity in here. Things made sense. A couple of weird spelling and grammatical errors now and again though, so maybe on a reprint they'll correct those, but nothing that made it, you know, impossible to play. There was just one in particular that was a little bit weird, where I'm trying to think, here we go, yeah. If a player removes a card from the draw deck, they must shuffle it afterwards, full stop, discard pile, and create a new draw deck. Okay, there's a little bit of a weird reading in there, but, you know, one that I've asked on BGG, but aside from that, you know, the rulebook was generally quite fine. Really where the game shines most is the deck building part of this. You start off with an 11 card starter deck, mostly of rubbish, but as you go through the game, you're buying these different cards, and you're going to need to buy some regardless of whether you're focusing on it or not, because they're worth points and they are much better cards. But the idea is that when you buy a new card, it goes straight to your hand, so you can use it literally from then on, within the same round. Turn 2, I buy myself a really cool card. Turn 3, I then play said card. I'm allowed to. And there's a lot of ways in this game to trash cards from your deck. This has probably got the most ways to do it. You could actually be in a position where you get rid of every single starter card you began the game with, if you do enough trashing of cards. So there's certainly a lot of tweaking that you can do, although that does bring in a little bit of a flaw, because I would have maybe preferred if it wasn't deck building in this instance, because there are some times when you need to critically do secondary actions, especially if you're trying to get to the end and get the most points. But in a deck building game, the nature of randomness is that you might just draw cards and not get what you like. You could have 8 cards in your deck, most of which are really good cards and of the actions that you want. You then draw 4 more all the time at the end of a round, and you get nothing but rubbish. Well, what can you do? You've got to go out of your way to try and draw more cards, but you only have 4 turns in a round, and if you're having to go out of your way to do that, other people are naturally doing better than you as a result. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if the game was nice and short, but it's short up to a point. It says 90 minutes on the box, and it just does it as a flat figure, and it's only 2 to 4 players, so there's no solo mode. I don't like it when games just put a flat figure on the box, because that's always complete garbage. You know, the game will be 90 minutes at 1 player count, but what about the other player counts? You know, you need to put a range, you need to be more sort of like give a broad spectrum. And for this, honestly, it's about 30 minutes a player. You are talking about just over an hour if you play this with 2. You're talking 90 minutes if you play it with 3, and that's assuming people go at a reasonable pace, because there is a decent amount of AP that can arise from this. But 4 players, oh my word, this game can drag on quite a bit. You're talking 2 hours plus the teach, and the game just isn't like complex enough to warrant that much time in the game. You know, there are 2-hour games I can play where there's a lot more going on, a lot more to think about. Here, you're not really doing a huge amount of thought processing. I mean, most of your thinking is, which cards will I play and which icon will I have at the top? Of which, if you're playing this game, you're essentially spamming the same secondary action throughout the whole game, so it's kind of self-evident what you're going to leave up. When you play this with 2, it's fine. When you play this with 3, it's just about right. When you play this with 4, though, this game is a 90-minute max type of game. I just don't think 2 hours plus the teach warrants it, because the game does drag a lot in rounds 4 and 5. You start off in rounds 1 and 2 playing not a huge amount, you know, there's not much going on, you've only got so many leaves and cards to do anything with, so the round 1 and 2 tend to be quick. It quickly snowballs though. In round 3 that takes a bit longer, and rounds 4 and 5 take a really long time because everybody's doing 4 actions a turn at that, 4 turns every round at that point, and the turns take longer because you've got more stuff to spend, more bonuses are being triggered off, and so it's a much more longer fraught process. You know, it's like, you know, speedy, as it just slows down to a crawl, and especially in a 4-player game with the downtime between turns that you've got very little to plan for, because most of the time people aren't going to interfere too much with what you do aside from buying a card that you like. Otherwise, everything is pretty much non-interactive. Another problem with the game, because the only bit of interaction in this game, really, honestly, is somebody might take the card you wanted, whether it's an Emperor card or one of the main cards. That's it. You don't interfere with each other on this track. There's no, like, first person to get to the top gets the bonus and everyone else loses on the Emperor track. There is no real sense of area control even on this map. I mean, this map has got limited spaces in some provinces, but even in a 3-player game, you'll be able to go pretty much where you like, except for a couple of the final provinces. In a 4-player game, you'll probably split and go in different directions, you know, like around the bottom or around the top of this map. And again, you probably won't hit each other because there's just there's too much space, and the map doesn't scale with players. In fact, the whole game doesn't scale with players. Literally, there's no player scaling. You don't, like, put less cards in. Oh no, sorry, there is a little player scaling. You have some player. You have a slightly different number of caravan cards in the deck, and out of the 5 tiers of cards, you put in so many for players. That's literally it. That is literally just so there's enough cards in the game. But other than that, the other players might as well not even be sitting at the table, and you can't play this solo, so really this game just feels like a 2-player game rather than a 3- and 4-player game. You know, I can't see myself ever really wanting to play this with 4, because for 2 hours plus a teach, I can think of other games that give me a bit more to think about on my turn and more to do than this one, even though this one is decent enough at 2 and 3. You know, 3 I think is the absolute max. In terms of the secondary actions as well, they're kind of a little generic in how they work. The cup connections is probably the most interesting of the lot. Yeah, it makes no thematic sense why you're, you know, putting colours together, and honestly, the theme in this game is kind of non-existent really, apart from the whole way that leaves go up and down in quality. You could replace this theme with just about anything that would still work. But putting these together and getting bonuses and sometimes repopulating them can lead to some fun jiggery-pokery, like janky combos with these. But the river track and this university track are pretty boring because they're the same thing really. Each of these 3 secondary actions tends to cap at somewhere around the 20 to 30 point mark, depending on how far you get. But the river and the university track are the same thing. They're just a track. The river, you start here, end up here, get bonuses along the way. University track, you go around in circles and get bonuses along the way. The only thing that is slightly different is that one of them is a bit better at getting leaves and fermenting, and the other one is better at getting scroll tiles and various other little bonuses. But that's literally the only difference between them. If one maxes out the river, they'll get 25 points on the river track. If somebody maxes out the university track, they'll get somewhere in the region of 25 to 30 points. If someone gets all 7 cup connections, you know, and maxes out that scoring, that's about 25 odd points or something. I forget the exact number. So the differential between the 3 tracks is almost sort of non-existent really. But that's the bulk of your scoring at the end. Those secondary actions and the Emperor cards. I cannot stress enough how much the Emperor cards are so critical. You can get 3 of them in the game. They can score you something like, you know, 16, 18 points a piece if you max them out, and it's not that difficult to max them out really. So if you try to ignore Emperor cards, you will just flat out lose. So each game you're basically just deciding which secondary action to spam and what Emperor cards hopefully turn up. Although you don't see them all in every game, so you might have one here that gives you points for, you know, you get 3 points for every tea garden you built. Oh, that could be 18 points. I built all my tea gardens this game, and the card never appears. You know, you might focus on, I've got secondary cards that give me the ship action all the time, and the scoring card for that never turns up. So again, there's a random element as to what you're able to score for, and there's only 3 out on display at any one time, so it's difficult to plan ahead for what Emperor card is going to come out, and that just seems, again, something that can scupper you when it's not your fault, much like the deck building part here. You cannot ignore it. You need at least 2, if not all 3 Emperor cards to stand a chance of coming first. And it just, the game kind of gets a little samey. Like, each game plays out the same. You'll build most of your tea gardens by the end and they'll produce leaves. You'll pick a secondary action, move along the track, get some Emperor cards, job done. No game really feels that different. Even if I'm going for a different strategy, I don't really feel like I'm playing a very different game, and with 3 or 4 of you, all the stuff's going to be done. You're going to see everything. There's not that many cards in each tier of here, and they're basically just the equivalent of how many teapots do they have, do they have a secondary action, what's their strength value, and you can sell some leaves in the late game. That's kind of it. And once you're done, it takes it forever to score because this track only goes up to 50, and you have to do the 50 plus 100 plus 150 thing, and it's just gets annoying when you go, all right, I've scored a little bit, all right, there we go, and the game ends. Right, so now I've got to add 47, so hang on, that puts me there. Right, now I've got to add 36, right, that puts me back round to there, and it's like, could the track go to 100? That would have been easier. So, yeah, there's some decent stuff I like. The card system is cool. It looks beautiful. The rules are generally quite smooth. A few ambiguities with the way it's worded, but otherwise fine. You know, could be a little bit less text heavy. And for 2 to 3 players, it's a decent length and pretty smooth. It just drags its heels a bit in round 4 and 5, particularly with 4 players. I don't recommend this game with 4. Hell, even recommending it with 3 is kind of a lot to say because frankly there's just no player interaction. But the card system is fun. There is a decent amount to plan for the round, and it is fun doing the whole resource management with the leaves. So the game is decent, but not blowing my mind. I give it a 6 out of 10 overall. It's above average. It's not enough for me to say everybody's going to go out and buy this. You know, I think the replay value is a little bit questionable, you know, with what is here, especially when most of it is just leveling up tracks, and the fact that there's no interaction really with players means that there's just not much reason to play with more players. And as much as it looks great and has a cool little card system action, it is frustrating when it just, you know, luck of the draw just happens to screw you over in a game where, you know, it's critical to do as many of the secondary actions as possible as well as get the Emperor cards. So there's, you know, a few niggles that get in the way of making this like one that I can, you know, wholeheartedly give seals to, but I still think it's decent. I think it's going to have its fans, but it's certainly not the best game I've played all year, you know, by a shot, and I'd certainly prefer SETI a lot more, you know, but I still think this is decent, but just not blowing my mind. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumbs up on YouTube and thumbs up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Don't forget to check out the rest of my content. Check out the other review I did for this designer, SETI. It's a little bit more gushing than this one. And there's, of course, more games to come besides, including the other game by this designer, Galileo Galilei, which I will be hoping to get done at some point during November. And, of course, let me know your thoughts. Do you really love Tea Garden? Do you agree or disagree with the comments I've made? What are your thoughts? Or would like to know and discuss them with you. So take care. And remember, regardless of whether you prefer a cup of Darjeeling or some Earl Grey, personally, I'd just rather have a chamomile, to be honest, it's still only a game, so bye for now.